Queen Street United Methodist Church in downtown Kinston, North Carolina. Welcome to our weekly Bible class, Wesley Bible class. And today we're going to be doing Deuteronomy chapter 25, which is, hope you've had breakfast. It's another one of those. This thing is PG, just tell the kids that they can go study something else for a while. Anyway, here we go. Suppose two persons have a dispute and enter into litigation, and the judge decides between them, declaring one to be in the right and the other to be in the wrong. If the one in the wrong deserves to be flogged, the judge shall make that person lie down and be beaten in his presence with the number of lashes proportionate to the offense. 40 lashes may be given, but not more. If more lashes than these are given, your neighbor will be degraded in your sight. You shall not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain. That's a quick shift. Okay. A couple of things. As we talked about before, there was no such thing back then as long-term incarceration. People didn't go to jail as a punishment. They went to jail in preparation for their trial. And then once the trial was over, then as soon as possible, the sentence was carried out. In colonial Williamsburg, flogging was still on the books, putting people in stocks. Stocks are the restraints. A person sits down on something very uncomfortable, and they stick their feet out, and there's a board with two holes in it for their feet, and so that's where you get stockings. You know, if they're restraining their feet. And the other is the pillory, and the pillory is where you have your hands and your head through the thing.
How long would they stay in this?
That depends on the judge. Depends on the sentence that the judge metes out. Now, normally in Williamsburg, flogging and all of that was consistent with a misdemeanor crime. So petty theft, things like that. You could be flogged, or you could be fined. Fined was also a means. If you did not attend church, you were fined.
Maybe we should do that today.
Well, that would be fine for some churches, but not for this one. We are not Church of England. But the main reason why you had to attend church back then was that's where the public announcements were made. And you would not be informed of the laws that are being passed down unless you attended church. So it was your civic duty to go to church so that you would stay current with the current regulations of the town. And you would be fined because that's a violation of your responsibilities as a citizen to stay informed. Also, the Church of England was responsible for all social services, so taking care of the needy and, you know, the things that we've been talking about in Deuteronomy, looking after widows and orphans and things like that, was the responsibility of the church. And the church was part of the government, so basically they were the Department of Welfare. But if you committed a felony, then one of three things would happen. One, you could be exonerated. But if you were not, if it was a felony, you'd be hung. So stealing a horse was a major thing, and you'd be hung for that. Murder was part of the felony process. If it was a first offense and they didn't want to hang you, you would get what's called benefit of clergy. And you'd have to ask for that yourself. And what they would do immediately is they would tie your arm down to the bar, the rail that separated the audience from the court, and they had a branding iron. And depending on what offense it was, they would brand you on the inside of your thumb, like that. So it would be, for theft, it would be a T. If it was manslaughter, it would be an M. But they would brand you with something. And then if you were going to enter into commerce with any shaking hands, and they would say, oh. So it was, you were barred from being in the militia as well. Okay, so anyway, with this, it's kind of interesting because the person is not standing up when they're being flogged, they're lying down while they're being flogged. There's a limitation on how many lashes you would get. If they use something like a cat o' nine tail, each one of those represented a lash. And you couldn't exceed that. If you exceeded the 40 lashes, what they're saying here is 40 lashes may be given, but no more. If more lashes are given, your neighbor will be degraded in your sight. Now, it doesn't say which neighbor, the litigant or the defendant, but it was like that would be considered cruel and unusual punishment if you exceeded 40 lashes. So you weren't supposed to kill somebody with the whipping. The Romans were much more generous with the whipping, and they didn't mind killing you with that. And they enhanced it with all kinds of bad things. So I'm not sure that that was the case back then, that they enhanced the whip or anything. But generally speaking, I would think in this society, since they were interested in proportionates and things like that, they probably did not. You shall not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain. Now this was quoted later in the New Testament when Paul was talking about whether or not the apostles should be paid for starting churches and whether or not the church should support the apostles. And so this has to do not just with oxen, but this has to do with you will pay your labor. Okay, it wasn't just about oxen. It was a metaphor for anybody who works for you. You don't deny wages to people who work for you. And if an apostle is out forming a church, it was not improper for the church to compensate the apostle for the work in the church. Okay, here we go. When brothers reside and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her, taking her in marriage and performing the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the firstborn whom she bears shall succeed to the name of the deceased brother, so that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. But if the man has no desire to marry his brother's widow, could happen, then his brother's widow shall go up to the elders at the gate. My husband's brother refuses to perpetuate his brother's name in Israel, but he will not perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. Then the elders of the town shall summon him and speak to him. If he persists, saying, I have no desire to marry her, then his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, pull his sandal off his foot, spit in his face, and declare, this is what is done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. Throughout Israel, his family shall be known as the house of him whose sandal was pulled off. I don't know if he got a certificate or... my memory's so bad. I'm trying to think of the example of this in the Old Testament where that actually happened to one of the patriarchs of Israel, where a brother died and the other brother refused to fulfill his obligations to his brother's wife. He absolutely adamantly did. He was devious about the whole thing. And so Daddy didn't do anything about it. She wasn't able to pull off the sandal and spit in his face. So what the woman did was she went off to a house of ill repute where the daddy frequented, and she veiled herself so the daddy didn't know who she was, okay? And he said he didn't have the money to pay her So she said, I'll take your staff and your ring as surety for this, okay? She went back to the house, and they found out that she was pregnant. So, So when they found out she was pregnant, they were ready to stone her to death, and what did she do? She whooped out the staff and the ring, and sure enough, and Daddy said, well, you know, that's on me.
Yeah.
I would think so.
So there you go. But this is a big deal. You have to, in that culture, it was not just a woman's duty to procreate, it was her right. You could not deny her the right to bear children. In a marriage, that would be the one thing that she could use for a divorce, is that her husband would not try to procreate children with her. Okay? So, but it was her right, and this woman knew how to, I don't know if you'd say stand up for your rights, but she did. And now another wonderful thing. If men get into a fight with one another, and the wife of one intervenes to rescue her husband from the grip of his opponent by reaching out and seizing his genitals, you shall cut off her hand. Show no pity. Now, I just want you to know that if I'm in distress and Mama can do something about it, I really don't care what she does. Whatever works is fine with me. I ain't cutting her hand off. No way. But, you know, some things are kind of sacred back then, and that was one of them. You didn't mess with that. So, you know, you get into this stuff, and this is rough stuff. This is rough stuff. So this was not a, you know, we think of the children of Israel, God's children, peaceably existing, coexisting with one another, and, you know, just, they all get along, and boy, they didn't, okay? Tribes would fight tribes. It was a mess. It was really a mess. It was,
They were people.
they were people, and they had issues, and because they had issues, they had laws, okay? And it was not uncommon for women to follow men onto the battlefield, and, you know, bring them water, they wanted to make sure that the wounded were taken care of. In the Middle Ages, during the time when there were a lot of mercenaries being used for armies in the societies back then on the mainland of Europe, the women were very much a part of what was going on, and they would marry a mercenary because that was the only way that she could get support. And mercenaries were allowed to loot. Some of them dressed in finery, you know. But if there was a battle going on, the women were right out there. There were no ambulances or, you know, medics or anything. So the women would go out to the battlefield as soon as possible and try and rescue whoever their spouse was who was wounded. And you could imagine, because some of these, maybe when the fight's over, the fight's not over for some of them, you know, and there wouldn't be anybody really to intervene. So anyway, women were close to combat back then. Okay, they were very close to combat. Okay, you shall not have in your bag 2 kinds of weights, large and small. You shall not have in your house 2 kinds of measures, large and small. You shall have only a full and honest weight. You shall have only a full and honest measure, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. For all who do such things, who act dishonestly, are abhorrent to the Lord your God. So no cheating when you're weighing out things, you know. You've got you're buying meat or something, and they have the scales, and You know, people were cheating on that, and they didn't have a Bureau of Weights and Measures. Well, I guess they kind of did. The standard weights were in the temple. So if you were going to use a weight out of the weight that the priest had in the temple, so there was a standard, and they could tell whether or not somebody was deviating from that, because, you know, somebody could carry a weight of their own to see if it matched. So people could get caught cheating on this, and they didn't like the idea. This is one of the things that was a hallmark of working with the. One of the reasons why the Jews were so good in commerce in the societies where they found themselves is that they didn't cheat you. You could, you know, if they weighed something out, you could trust the weight, you know. Now, I'm sure that there were Jews that did, but generally speaking, as a society, this was this kind of corruption was not tolerated. And I think it interesting where it says where you could live long in the land. You know, it was one of those deals where you get caught cheating on some of this, you may not be living very long in the land. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey out of Egypt, how he attacked you on the way when you were faint and weary and struck down all who lagged behind you. He did not fear God. Therefore, when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your enemies on every hand, in the land that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance to possess, you shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under the heavens. Do not forget. So we're carrying old grudges. Okay? Once you are established in the land and you wiped out the Canaanites pretty much that God has told you to wipe out, which they never did, don't forget to go back and take care of business. Okay? Now what does this tell us today? What kind of going back kind of things are we hearing about today, where we're supposed to carry an old grudge?
Reparations.
Huh?
Reparations.
Yeah, reparations. Reparations. One of the things that we have gone through recently was this kind of philosophy that was being promoted by the previous administration, where we were supposed to remain in a constant state of grievance based on how one race treated another generations ago. Okay? And so what the administration was doing was promoting old grudges. And while certainly injustices were committed, the society has gone a long way to delegitimize those injustices. You know, if we found an injustice, we basically made sure there was a law that said this is unjust and that you can be punished for exercising that injustice. So then the question is, what do you do with that? Well, what's the Christian perspective on grudges?
So let them go.
Forgive.
So let them go.
You're supposed to let them go.
Okay.
You're supposed to forgive, as you have been forgiven. So if God has a legitimate beef about you and could carry that grudge to judgment, whether or not you repented, okay? Christians are enjoined not to carry grudges against anybody else. I think Jesus' parable about the guy who owed a lot of money to his master, and the master forgave the debt, and then he went out and put everybody else in jail that owed him money. The master turned on him, okay, because it's like an old grudge. So he said, you should have been merciful like I was merciful, okay? So the Christian attitude towards this is that what's past is past, okay? and I'm not going to carry the grudge. And it's hard for us because, we may not have this generational thing going on, but there are certainly people that we have a grudge against, maybe an old one, a long-standing one, and we've got to wonder what to do about that. But if they're an Amalek, you can just go back and kill them. If you're Amalekite, you go back and kill them. That's what this says. Okay. I don't necessarily think that that's the way things should be done. It would have been better if they'd gone back and settled with the Amalekites and had a good operating conversation with the generations past. What's going on now in Israel is exactly what happens when old grudges are not forgotten. Okay, that's what's going on. They keep this thing. They keep the wound open. They keep the wound open.
Years ago, thousands of years ago.
Yes, yes, but mostly back to 1947. Mostly back to 1947. And before that, actually, because there was when the Ottoman Empire fell, and the British were in charge of the region called Palestine, not the nation of Palestine. There never was that, but the region of Palestine. There was a tremendous amount of rancor between the Arabs who lived in that territory and the Jews who were, because of persecutions in Europe, were flooding into Israel even before World War II. And so there was a lot of ethnic tension going on, I guess, since that happened. Anytime after 1918, you started to see these things start to build in that region. But what this says is if you have an old grudge against another nation, it is legitimate for you to not just go back and punish them, it's legitimate for you to go back and annihilate them. I think we've moved on. I hope we've moved on. In some places they have not moved on because they're still calling for annihilation of the Jews. Jews are not calling for the annihilation of Palestinians. Okay. Chapter 26. First fruits and tithes. When you come into the land that the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance to possess you, and you possess it and settle it, you shall take some of the first of all the fruit of the ground, which you harvest from the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you shall put it in a basket and go to the place that the Lord your God shall choose as a dwelling for his name, Jerusalem. You shall go to the priest who is in office at that time and say to him, today I declare to the Lord your God, I have come into the land that the Lord swore to our ancestors to give us. When the priest takes the basket from your hand and sets it down before the altar of the Lord your God, you shall make this response before the Lord your God. And this is still a response that is said during Passover. A wandering Aramaean was my ancestor. We went down into Egypt and lived there as an alien, few in number, and there became a great nation, mighty and populous. When the Egyptians treated us harshly and afflicted us by imposing hard labor upon us, we cried to the Lord, and the Lord of our ancestors. The Lord heard our voice and saw our affliction, our toil and our oppression. The Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with a terrifying display of power, and with signs and wonders, and he brought us into this place and gave us the land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So now I bring the first of the fruit of the ground that you, O Lord, have given me. You shall set it down before the Lord your God, bow down before the Lord your God. Then you, together with the Levites and the aliens who are residing with you, you shall celebrate with all the bounty that the Lord your God has given to you and to your house. A couple of things on this. You will notice that all of these statements are done in the first person plural. It wasn't to our ancestors, it was to us, to me. This is the land you gave to me. Okay? So everything is first person. So history for them is a living thing that they are still going through. It is their story. It is the story of every generation. And there are some things that should be the story of every generation in our society as well. You know, like the Declaration of Independence. That is our declaration. The Constitution, that is our Constitution. You know, some of our history we need to leave in the past, okay, and get beyond it. But in terms of the freedoms that we espouse or aspire to, that is something that we ought to own every generation at a time. So a lot of this should be first person with us. Also, when they're talking about the tithe of the first fruits, people have a lot of different understanding about tithe. They think of the first fruits as the surplus instead of the first fruits. You know, the tithe is what you tithe after you paid your bills, and this says the tithe is the tithe you pay before you pay your bills. So I've had some questions about that, but if you understand the definition of tithing from a biblical standpoint, it's first fruits. When you finish paying all the tithe of your produce in the third year, which is the year of the tithe, giving it to the Levites, the aliens, now that's something. Pay your tithe every third year. There's a thought. The aliens, the orphans, and the widows, so that they may eat their fill within your towns. Then you shall say before the Lord your God, I have removed the sacred portions from the house, and I have given it to the Levites, the resident aliens, the orphans, and the widows, in accordance with your entire commandment that you commanded me. Okay, I have removed the sacred things from my house. That means that if you retain those things for your use, you are being sacrilegious.
Say that again.
You are being sacrilegious if you use the things that are supposed to be dedicated to the Lord. Okay? In accordance with your commandments, I have neither transgressed nor forgotten any of your commandments. I have not eaten of it while in the morning. I have not removed any of it while I was unclean. I have not offered any of it to the dead, which is a pagan practice. I have obeyed the Lord my God, doing just as you commanded me. Look down from your holy habitation from heaven and bless your people Israel and the ground that you have given us, as you swore to our ancestors, a land flowing with milk and honey. Understand that most of the gods that the Canaanites worshiped had to do with fertility, had to do with good crops. You know, a lot of it was the gods controlled agricultural things in all the societies, and in this society no less. If you don't pay the tithe, you're not likely to have a good crop next year. That's what they're saying. Okay? If you don't look after the things of God, then God will not necessarily look after you. I know that over the course of my life, our family has gone through some really, really tough times. And we always consistently paid the tithe, even in the most difficult times. And I'm not saying it to boast, I'm saying that's just what we do, it's just practice that we do. But I can tell you that when we're going through difficult times, right when it looked the darkest, something would happen, something would come through, and we'd be able to pay our bills. Something unexpected, you know, unplanned would come through, and we'd be able to pay our bills. That's just how God works, okay? Don't forget God, and God doesn't seem to forget you. Okay, and at the end, this is the very day the Lord your God is commanding you to observe these statutes and ordinances, so observe them diligently with all your heart, with all your soul. Today you have obtained the Lord's agreement to be your God, and for you to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, and his ordinances, and to obey him. Today the Lord has obtained your agreement to be his treasured people, as he promised you, to keep his commandments, for him to set you high above all nations that he has made, in praise and in fame and in honor, and for you to be a people holy to the Lord your God, as he promised. So basically it's a covenant made. This is part of the covenant, okay? Of all the parts of Deuteronomy that we've read so far, this one most likely comes out of the Mosaic tradition. Okay? These are laws of Moses. And because it's anticipating when they are in the land that you'll go back and whack the Amalekites, right? Any questions or comments or snide remarks on what we
You know, I've heard of the debate over the years paying tithes on gross versus net.
You're right.
And I've heard pastors in the pulpit talk, you know, say, don't cheat God, you know,
Right.
pay on the gross.
Yep. Some people find that gross, but they, it's not a bad practice. I can tell you firsthand that you look after the things of the Lord looks after the things of yours. It's true. All right, well, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. And we'll pick it up at chapter 27. How's that sound?
That's good.
Okay.